The worst part wasn't waking up in the hospital, it was waking up alone. I blinked against the harsh white light, my head throbbing in rhythm with the dull beeping of the monitor beside me. The room was cold, sterile, and eerily quiet except for the faint hum of machines. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in my side stopped me. I had no idea how I'd gotten there. My name is Daniel Clark. I'm 34, a software engineer, and up until a few days ago, I thought I was in decent health. I don't drink much. I exercise occasionally, and apart from the occasional headache from staring at screens all day, I've never had major medical issues. So why the hell was I in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, with no memory of how I'd arrived? Mr. Clark? The voice startled me. A nurse, mid-40s, with tired eyes and a forced smile, stood at the door. Her name tag read Heather. "How are you feeling?" she asked, stepping inside and checking my IV line. "Confused," I said. "What happened?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but I noticed. "You collapsed," she said finally. "Your neighbors called an ambulance when they saw you lying in the hallway outside your apartment." That didn't make sense. I didn't remember feeling sick, let alone collapsing. Am I okay? Heather gave me another one of those practiced smiles. "You'll be fine. The doctors want to keep you overnight for observation, but your tests came back normal. Probably just stress." Stress. That word felt like a band-aid slapped over a much bigger problem. I wanted to ask more, but she left before I could. The hours dragged on. Day shifted into evening, and the faint glow of the setting sun seeped through the blinds. I stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together the last thing I remembered. I'd been at work, coding late into the night. I'd walked home, unlocked my door, and then nothing. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to darkness and silence. Hospitals are never truly quiet, not during the day, but at night it's different. The noises are subtle, the occasional creak of footsteps in the hallway, the distant murmur of voices, the hum of fluorescent lights. I checked the clock. 2:12 a.m. I shifted in bed, wincing as pain flared in my side. That's when I noticed it. The door to my room was open. I was sure Heather had closed it earlier. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she'd left it ajar during her last check. Still, a prickle of unease crawled up my spine. I reached for the call button, hesitating as my hand hovered over it. That's when I heard the sound. A faint shuffle. It came from somewhere down the hallway, growing louder by the second. I leaned forward, squinting into the darkness beyond my door. Nothing. The sound stopped. I exhaled, letting myself relax. Probably just another patient or a nurse. Hospitals weren't exactly restful places. I was about to lie back down when a shadow passed across the doorway. My heart stopped. It wasn't a quick flicker of movement. It lingered, like someone was standing just out of sight. "Hello," my voice cracked. No response. The shadow moved again, this time retreating down the hall. I wasn't the kind of person to jump to conclusions. I told myself it was just someone wandering the hall, maybe disoriented or lost. It wasn't unusual in a place like this, but as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Morning came, bringing with it a strange sense of relief. The daylight felt safer, less oppressive. Heather returned with a breakfast tray and a cheerful "good news. You're being discharged today." I should have been happy, but something gnawed at me. "Did anyone come into my room last night?" I asked. Heather frowned. "Not that I know of." "Why?" I thought. "I saw someone." Her smile faltered. "We've had a few patients complain about that. Shadows, noises. It's an old building, Mr. Clark. It creaks." The explanation didn't satisfy me, but I nodded anyway. By noon, I was out the door with a bag of medication and a list of instructions. The hospital looked different in daylight, less menacing, more mundane. I told myself that everything I'd experienced was just a product of stress and exhaustion. But when I got home, things only got worse. It started with small things. My apartment felt colder than usual, no matter how high I turned up the heat. At night, I'd wake up to faint noises. A tap dripping in the kitchen, the creak of floorboards, the soft shuffle of movement just beyond my bedroom door. I convinced myself it was paranoia, until the calls started. The first one came 3 days after I'd left the hospital. It was late, almost midnight. I'd been lying on the couch, trying to fall asleep, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to. "Hello?" At first, there was nothing. just static. Then, faintly, a voice. Daniel. My blood ran cold. Who is this? I demanded. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, heart hammering. Over the next week, the calls became more frequent. Always the same. Static. My name whispered faintly, then silence. I blocked the number, but it didn't matter. Whoever or whatever was calling always found another way. And then, last night, it happened. I woke to a familiar sound, shuffling, faint but distinct. It wasn't coming from the hallway or the apartment above me. It was inside my room. I froze, my breath hitching as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. There, at the foot of my bed, was a figure. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was shadowy, featureless, its form shifting and flickering like a poorly tuned TV. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It leaned closer, and as it did, I heard the voice again. Daniel. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear, before it finally disappeared. I'm writing this now because I need someone to believe me. I haven't slept since last night, and every time I close my eyes, I feel like I'm back in that hospital room. The shadows are everywhere now. In my apartment, in the corners of my vision, even in broad daylight. I don't know what it wants. But I do know one thing. Whatever followed me out of that hospital isn't going away. I never wanted to work the night shift. There's something inherently unsettling about hospitals after dark, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. The long corridors that seem to stretch endlessly under the harsh glow of flickering fluorescent lights. But when you're a second-year nursing student trying to scrape by, you take what you can get. My name is Rachel, and I've been shadowing night nurses at St. Clair's Hospital for the past 3 months. St. Clair's isn't one of those sleek, modern facilities with glass walls and state-of-the-art technology. It's old. The kind of hospital with peeling paint, leaky pipes, and a permanent smell of disinfectant mixed with something faintly sour. Most of the rooms are empty now, the patients confined to a single wing while the rest of the building waits for funding that never comes. When my supervisor, Nurse Karen, asked me to do a final walkthrough of the East Wing that night, I didn't think twice. It was protocol. Check the rooms, make sure nothing was out of place. Lock up. Easy enough, right? The East Wing hadn't been used in years. Budget cuts, Karen had explained with a shrug. Most of the equipment had been moved elsewhere, and the remaining beds were gathering dust under plastic sheets. I didn't mind going alone. I figured I could get through it quickly and get back to the break room for a cup of stale coffee before my shift ended. But as soon as I stepped into the wing, I regretted it. The air was different, they're stale and heavy, like it had been sealed off for decades. My footsteps echoed unnervingly, bouncing off the narrow walls and making me feel as though I wasn't alone. I tried to shake off the unease, reminding myself that I was being ridiculous. The first few rooms were exactly as I'd expected. Empty beds, faded curtains, and abandoned medical equipment. But when I reached room 217, I stopped. The door was ajar. I was sure it hadn't been open earlier. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the handle, trying to convince myself that Karen must have left it open earlier. Maybe someone had forgotten to check it. That was all. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by the pale glow of a street lamp filtering through the blinds. The bed was neatly made, but the chair in the corner was turned toward me, as though someone had been sitting there and left in a hurry. That's when I noticed it, the faint indentation on the bed, as though someone had been lying there. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a cleaning crew had been here earlier. Maybe I was imagining things. I turned to leave, but as I stepped into the hallway, I felt a distinct shift in the air, like someone was standing right behind me. My heart raced as I turned around, expecting to see, I don't know what, but the hallway was empty. I tried to laugh it off, brushing my damp palms against my scrubs. "Get a grip, Rachel," I muttered. I moved to the next room, then the next, methodically checking each one. Nothing out of the ordinary. By the time I reached the end of the hall, I'd almost convinced myself that the strange feeling was just my imagination. I started heading back, relieved that I'd be done soon. But as I passed room 217 again, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The door was open again. This time, it was wide open. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to walk away, to run back to the nurse's station and tell Karen I couldn't finish the walkthrough. But I couldn't leave it, not without checking. I stepped into the room again, my pulse pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. My breath caught in my throat as I picked it up. Rachel Morgan. My name was printed clearly on the band, along with today's date. Panic surged through me as I dropped the bracelet, my hands trembling. This didn't make sense. It couldn't be real. And then behind me, the sound of faint breathing. I spun around, but the room was empty. Karen? My voice cracked as I called out, hoping, praying that she'd somehow followed me here. No response. The breathing grew louder, closer, as though it was right next to me. I backed out of the room, nearly tripping over my own feet, and bolted down the hallway. When I finally reached the nurse's station, Karen was there, sipping her coffee as if nothing was wrong. "What happened to you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I tried to explain, my words tumbling over each other as I described the open door, the bracelet, the breathing. Karen's expression softened, and she put a hand on my shoulder. "You've been working too hard, Rachel. You probably imagined it." I wanted to argue, to insist that what I'd experienced was real, but her calm tone was oddly reassuring. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd let my exhaustion get the better of me. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, and when my shift ended, I felt a strange sense of relief as I stepped outside into the crisp morning air. But that relief didn't last. When I got home, I emptied my bag onto the kitchen counter, looking for my keys. Instead, I found something else, a hospital bracelet with my name on it, and beneath it, scrawled in shaky handwriting on a scrap of paper, was a message I'll never forget. "You can't leave." The last thing I expected when I checked into the hospital was to leave questioning my sanity. It all started with something so ordinary that I almost dismissed it entirely, a flickering light above the nurse's station. "My name is Ben, and I'm 34 years old. A ruptured appendix landed me in St. Mary's Hospital, a facility that hadn't seen renovations since, by my estimate, the 1970s. The walls were painted a sickly shade of beige, the kind that made everything feel slightly jaundiced. My room was a small single-occupancy space at the end of the hallway, with a window overlooking the parking lot. Not much of a view, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get in, get the surgery, and get out. The first night was uneventful. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals and IV. The painkillers dulled my senses, and I drifted in and out of sleep, interrupted only by the occasional beep of a monitor. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel. I woke up to the sound of distant footsteps, not unusual in a hospital, but these sounded different, uneven, as if whoever was walking had a limp. They grew louder, then stopped abruptly outside my door. I waited for the handle to turn, for a nurse or orderly to walk in, but the door remained shut. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse. No response. I figured I was just imagining things, a side effect of the painkillers, and tried to go back to sleep. But as I rolled over, I noticed something strange. The shadows in the room, they weren't where they should be. The light from the hallway created a faint glow under the door, enough to cast shadows from the furniture. But the shadow of the chair in the corner didn't match its shape. It was elongated, distorted, almost like someone was sitting in it. My heart began to race as I stared at it, willing myself to look away but unable to. And then it moved. The rational part of my brain kicked in. "It's nothing," I told myself, "just a trick of the light." I reached for the call button to summon a nurse, but my hand trembled so much that I dropped it. The remote hit the floor with a soft thud, and the sound seemed to echo unnaturally in the small room. Before I could retrieve it, the shadow dissolved. Not like it disappeared, it melted into the floor, pooling like ink before vanishing entirely. My breath caught in my throat, and I stayed frozen, staring at the now empty corner. The nurse who eventually came to check on me found nothing unusual. I didn't mention the shadow. What was I supposed to say? Instead, I muttered something about needing water. She nodded, left, and I spent the rest of the night with the overhead light on, unable to sleep. The next day, I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Hospitals are disorienting places. Between the medication, the pain, and the sterile environment, it wasn't surprising that my mind might play tricks on me. By mid-afternoon, I had almost succeeded in brushing it off. Almost. The janitor was mopping the hallway outside my room when I noticed him. He was an older man, with a hunched back and a weary expression. Something about him seemed out of place. His uniform was the same pale blue as the others, but it looked faded, almost like it had been washed too many times. His movements were slow, deliberate, and he didn't acknowledge me when I waved. Later, when a nurse came in to change my IV, I asked about him. The janitor, he's been here a while, hasn't he? She frowned. What janitor? The older guy, gray hair, stooped shoulders. He was just outside, I said, feeling a chill creep up my spine. Her expression softened, as if she thought I was confused. We don't have anyone like that on staff. Maybe you saw a visitor? That night, I asked for a sleeping pill, determined to get through until morning without incident. It worked for a while. I woke up around 3 a.m., the room bathed in the dim, artificial glow of the security lights outside. My first thought was that something felt wrong. The air was too still, too heavy, and then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like someone drumming their fingers on the metal frame of my bed. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I might see. There was no one there, but the tapping continued. By the fourth day, I was a wreck. The shadows, the footsteps, the tapping, it was all getting to me. I asked the doctor if I could be discharged early, but he insisted I stay for observation. You're healing well, but we're not quite ready to let you go, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, I decided to stay awake. No more sleeping pills, no more letting my guard down. I sat up in bed, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The hours dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. Around 2 a.m., the overhead light flickered, then went out entirely, plunging the room into near darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of my phone screen, and then I saw it. In the reflection of the darkened TV screen, a figure stood at the foot of my bed. It was humanoid but wrong, its proportions slightly off, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. I didn't dare turn around. My breath came in shallow gasps as I watched it in the reflection, praying it wouldn't move. It did. The figure stepped closer, its movements jerky, as if it didn't quite know how to use its limbs. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but no sound came out. The air felt thick, oppressive, and my body refused to obey me. Just as it reached the side of my bed, the lights flickered back on. The figure was gone. When the nurse came in that morning, I'd begged her to let me leave. I must have sounded deranged, but I didn't care. She relented, promising to expedite my discharge paperwork. I've been home for 2 weeks now, but the hospital hasn't left me. I see shadows where there shouldn't be any. I hear footsteps in the middle of the night. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I feel a soft, rhythmic tapping on the frame. I don't think I brought whatever it was home with me. I think it's always been here. It started with the sound of my name. Not a whisper, not a shout, but a calm, almost indifferent voice that carried an uncanny weight. It was the kind of voice you might hear in a half-forgotten dream or a memory that doesn't belong to you, Daniel. I looked up from the pages of my battered paperback, blinking under the cold fluorescent lights of the hospital lounge. The room was empty, save for the faint hum of the vending machine in the corner. I was sure I had heard it clear as the creak of my chair when I shifted uneasily. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not this late, not like this. My younger sister, Emma, had been admitted 2 days earlier for a persistent fever and strange bouts of dizziness. Routine, they said, but they decided to keep her for observation just in case. My parents were out of town, so I volunteered to stay nearby. At 27, I didn't think of myself as particularly responsible or selfless, but Emma was different. She was my anchor in a life that often felt like it was drifting off course. The lounge was sterile, the walls an indifferent shade of beige, decorated with motivational posters that felt more mocking than inspiring. A clock ticked faintly on the far wall, its hands moving too slowly for my liking. I needed to stretch my legs, clear my head. The hallway outside was unsettlingly quiet. Hospitals are supposed to hum with activity. Even at night, nurses at their stations, patients murmuring, the occasional beeping of monitors. But this corridor was silent, as though the air itself had been vacuumed out. Emma's room was at the far end of the hall, a dim glow spilling out from the small window in her door. As I approached, I hesitated. Something felt off. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see the edge of her bed. Emma? I called softly, pushing the door open. The bed was empty. My stomach tightened. I stepped inside, glancing around. Her IV stand was still there, the drip rhythmically ticking away. The sheets were crumpled, but there was no sign of her. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. The nurse's station was my next stop. It was deserted, the swivel chair at the desk spinning lazily as though someone had just left it. A faint trace of perfume lingered in the air, something floral, almost sickly sweet. Hello? My voice echoed in the emptiness, and then I saw it. On the desk was a clipboard. Emma's name scrawled in bold letters at the top. Beneath it, a note that didn't belong. Room 318. The odd thing? Emma wasn't in room 318. She was in 304. A chill crept down my spine as I moved down the corridor toward the new room number. The farther I walked, the darker the hallway seemed to grow, the overhead lights flickering faintly like old dying stars. Room 318's door was closed, but not completely. It was cracked open just enough for me to see the edge of something inside. A shadow shifting. I hesitated, my pulse pounding in my ears. Emma? My voice trembled, and I hated the sound of it. The shadow froze, and then it moved, gliding toward the door. I stumbled back as the door creaked open, revealing nothing. The room was empty. No bed, no furniture, just blank walls and a floor that gleamed unnaturally, as though it had been freshly polished. And then, behind me, the sound of breathing. I spun around, heart hammering, but the hallway was as empty as before. Daniel. This time, the voice was closer, sharper. I felt a rush of cold air against the back of my neck and bolted back down the hallway, nearly slipping on the polished floor. My chest burned as I reached the nurse's station again, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. Something wasn't right. Something was very, very wrong. And then the lights went out. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing and the faint hum of the air conditioning. My phone, I reached for it, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, shaky but better than nothing. I turned toward Emma's room, my every instinct screaming at me to leave, to get out of this place. But I couldn't. She was still here, somewhere. As I approached room 304 again, the door was wide open. The light inside was flickering, casting strange, elongated shadows against the walls. And there she was, Emma, sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me, her hair hung limp, her hospital gown crumpled. Emma, I breathed, relief washing over me as I stepped inside. What are you doing? You scared the hell out of me. She didn't respond. I circled around the bed to face her, and the relief curdled into dread. It wasn't Emma. Her face was wrong, pale and sunken, the eyes too large, the mouth stretched into a faint, unnatural smile. She tilted her head, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. Daniel, she said, and the voice was hers this time, perfectly mimicked. I staggered back, hitting the wall as the figure rose from the bed, its movements jerky, almost mechanical. Stay away, I shouted, but my voice cracked, the words weak and desperate. The figure tilted its head again, the smile widening impossibly, and then it lunged. I don't remember running. I don't remember bursting through the hospital doors and into the freezing night air. I don't remember screaming until my throat felt raw. But I remember the last thing I saw as I glanced back at the building, the figure standing in the window of room 304, watching me, its smile pressed against the glass. Emma was never found.